Hi everyone, welcome back to our channel. Beck's here today to do a book to movie comparison for you on a book that you may recognize, that is The Glass Castle by Jeanette Walls. I recently finally picked this up, got my hands on the DVD, and decided that this would be a fun video to film. This memoir, if you haven't heard of it, was originally published in 2005, and it's one of those book covers that I have seen everywhere for years. I didn't realize for a long time that it was a memoir, but when I finally learned what it was about, I immediately wanted to check it out. It apparently was on the New York Times bestseller list for over 7 years, which explains why I saw it so much and just didn't really register what it was. But this memoir follows Jeanette's childhood, mostly her childhood. There is a little bit later on when she's a young adult, but it really chronicles her family, her sort of vibrant and dysfunctional family. We have her parents, and then she has 3 siblings as well. Her parents are quite the characters. Her father is a brilliant individual, but he can't hold down a job. He drinks a lot. And then her mother is an artist. She's a very free spirit, and it's sort of debatable whether or not she ever really wanted to have kids. But we do learn about her siblings as well. Jeanette is the second oldest. She has an older sister and a younger brother and a younger sister, and we get to see a lot of their relationship and how that was really affected by the childhood that she grew up in. I thought this book did an excellent job of really highlighting the positives and negatives, at least from Jeanette's perspective, of growing up in this sort of lifestyle. They were often moving from place to place on no notice, kind of depended on what her father was up to at the time, if he had a job, if he thought the FBI was after them. There was a whole lot of things going on. And of course, this also affected their schooling, the friends that they made or never really had the chance to make, so it sort of explains why the siblings did become so close. The book shows the highs and lows of her relationship with her parents. She was particularly close with her father. They sort of had this extra special bond, and she was more likely to forgive him when he did do some very bad things. And so that relationship is highlighted in here and is highlighted later in the film too. Jeanette also loves her mother, but she doesn't have quite that close relationship with her, and you can see the moments where her mother really fails at taking care of them, just like her father does as well. And you can see how the kids had this very adventurous, fun life because her parents would have these great moments where they would want to teach them things and show them things and have them live life. But then you also have the other side of that, which is that they just didn't receive basic care. They were often dirty. They sometimes didn't have any food in the house. And so that is why Jeanette and her siblings are so close, because they did have to take care of each other, look out for each other, feed each other. And so you really experience those highs and lows with her when you're reading this book. As far as my reading experience with this book, I did not want to put it down. I would pick it up and then all of a sudden I'd be 50 pages farther in. The chapters are pretty short, so that definitely helps with feeling like you just have to keep going, keep going. But there were so many interesting things that happened to Jeanette in her childhood. Some of them good, some of them bad, but it made for a very compelling read, and I would have absolutely loved to have read a longer memoir. This is a little under 300 pages, which isn't abnormal for a memoir, but I would have read another 100 pages, especially if it had elaborated a bit more on her later life, like late teens into like university age, and then also was able to circle back on a few different things that were brought up earlier on in the story that seemed like we could have used a little bit more information about them. But overall, I had a fantastic time with this book. I gave it 5 stars, and I absolutely think it's a story worth telling and sharing. So that's what made me so curious to see how was it adapted into a film. The movie was released in 2017, and it stars Brie Larson as an adult Jeanette. Her parents are played by Woody Harrelson and Naomi Watts, and they are consistent throughout the entire film, but we do have a lot of other actors that play the Walls children throughout their lives. The book and the movie start very similarly in that Jeanette is in a taxi. The taxi is stopped. She happens to look over and she notices that her mother is digging through a dumpster. And since this is your first introduction to the story, you have no idea what's going on. You have very little context, and so it is a bit, wait, what? Like that's sort of your reaction to both the book and the film when you see it for the first time. So I did like that they kind of started the same way, even if it was slightly different in sort of the storyline that was happening around it, but you still got that same feeling when you were introduced to both mediums. The next thing that you'll notice is that the kids are aged up a little bit in the film, which makes sense. One of the first big stories that Jeanette talks about is when she was 3 and she is cooking hot dogs on the stove top, and she ends up, her clothes end up catching fire, and so she has burn scars on her body. And this was because her mother didn't want to make her food and her mom was too busy painting, and so you sort of start to get a better idea of what this family dynamic is like. But in the film, they do have to age them up a little bit. So it happens to a Jeanette that's maybe a little bit older than 3, but it's still the same sort of event, it still has the same sort of impact. And that does make sense for a film. It's hard to film with kids. There's a lot of restrictions on how long they're allowed to work and everything. So to age up the kids a little bit when you started the story makes sense. It also probably just means less casting the different ages. As I mentioned with the book, one of the big things is her relationships with her parents, and the film really leans into her relationship with her father. He has a pet name for her, Mountain Goat, which is used in the film as well. The whole idea of the glass castle is something that her father came up with. It's this house that he wants to build them someday. And of course that is talked about a lot in both. You can really see that extra special relationship that Jeanette and her father have. There's one point in both the book and the film where she asks him to try to stop drinking, and he does for like a relatively significant period of time, especially for him. And it was all because Jeanette asked him to after a really bad moment that they had. And you learn more of his story, you see more of their moments. Compared to her mom in the film, I do feel like they just didn't have the time to kind of show all of her stuff. Like she was definitely a character. She had a bit of a personality. You could still see the sort of the light and adventurous side of her. I feel like they didn't dig into more of her bad moments in the film because there were definitely some bad moments that happened in the book. I just feel like she was a bit more normal in the film. And I think that's just because they leaned into her dad and his personality and his storyline a bit more than Jeanette's mom. I would say the biggest difference between the book and the film is that they have added this character of David. He's Jeanette's fiance, played by Max Greenfield. And I feel like they added this storyline for a couple reasons. One of them being to give us as the viewer someone to relate to, because he's really the only person that we see a lot of that isn't part of the family. And so it gives us somebody to look at and go, yes, he's reacting the same. That's how I feel like seeing this. So I think they added him for that reason. And I also think it's because they wanted to expand the amount of time that the adult actors spent acting together, because the book is mostly Jeanette's childhood, high school, with just a little bit of the university age, early adult life. They leaned into the older Jeanette a little bit more to give the adult actors more to do and to have them interact a bit more. In the book, Jeanette does have a fiance. His name is Eric, though, and he's really not talked about much in the book. And then you do learn very early on, because it's literally in the dedication, that Jeanette is married to somebody else. So she clearly divorced Eric and then got remarried. They don't base David on that at all. David is his own completely made up character to just make the film have a particular feel and flow to it. That was the biggest difference, but there are some things that sort of changed between the book and the film that they were touched on, they were mentioned, they were shown, but maybe they were changed a little bit, like the location that it happened or the exact timing in Jeanette's life. They sort of shifted them around, and that makes sense. You obviously have to cut and pace things a little bit when you're making a movie because you just have less time to tell the story. There was one change that I found kind of the most egregious. Egregious is a bit of a dramatic word, but for those of you who've read the book or seen the film, maybe both, you'll remember that a lot of it takes place in Welch, West Virginia, which is where Jeanette's father's from. They end up going to live there for a long time because they just really have no other place to go. They don't have a lot of money. And in the book, they are living with Irma, who is her grandmother, her dad's mom, and they have to live with Irma for a while before they find a place to live within Welch. And during that time, the parents end up going back to Arizona to pick up a lot of the stuff that they left behind, because that is a common thing that they do. They leave a lot of things behind every time they end up packing everything up and moving. In the film, they have them already living in a house in Welch, and the parents have the kids go and stay with Irma. And based on everything that I know about the parents, what I've read about them, they wouldn't have made the kids go stay with Irma. They would have just left them alone in the house and left them to fend for themselves. So that was one change that they made, because in the book, they haven't found that place to live, so they're already staying with Irma. And the whole thing with Irma, some very bad stuff happens. And so that change in the movie really didn't make sense with kind of everything that I knew about the family up to this point. So that was the only one that kind of rubbed me the wrong way a bit, because it just didn't make sense. But all the other changes, I was like, okay, yeah, I understand why you did that. I get it. Obviously, there were a lot of things that had to be cut from the film. That's just how an adaptation works. But there are so many sort of sad, out there things that happen in the book that I really think you have to read the book to get the full scope of Jeanette's story. There were, you know, some more minor things, like the fact that they slept in cardboard boxes when they were little for many years because they just couldn't afford beds. And then also kind of bigger things that happened when they were older, like Maureen, Jeanette's younger sister. She had a lot of mental health struggles, and there's a whole sort of storyline that happens with that in the book that you just don't see in the film. One little thing that I did love about the movie that isn't in the book is that during the credits they had home videos and pictures of the Walls family. So it was really fun to see that and see the actual people and then see how they were portrayed in the film, especially because I kind of pictured them a certain way in my head when reading the book, and so to see the actual footage of them was a nice touch. So if it wasn't already clear just from all the little things that I've mentioned, the fact that I gave the book 5 stars, the book is definitely better. No surprise there. 5-star experience. There is so much more that is covered in the book, just in terms of this crazy life that she lived, that if you've seen the movie, I would absolutely say read the book, because the book has so much more going on, and I think it almost kind of explains certain things a little bit more. You sort of understand the bigger story. So yeah, 5 stars for the book. I'd say the movie did a decent job, but I'd still maybe a 3.5 stars. You still get the general feeling. You may be a little confused in certain moments just because it can't expand on things as much, but I feel like you just get so much more of the story in the book. The emotions are that much greater because you've seen so many more things. If you have read The Glass Castle or watched the film, maybe both, let me know what you thought of them in the comments down below. Our links are in the down bar as well. Feel free to check those out if you feel so inclined. Thank you all very much for watching, and I'll see you later.